The old man arrived at the dog park every morning at exactly 7:03, not 7 o'clock, not 7:05, always 7:03. After a few months, people started noticing. After a year, people started talking. By the second year, most people simply avoided him. His name was Walter. At least that's what the tag on his coffee thermos said. Nobody knew much else. He never introduced himself, never joined conversations, never laughed at the jokes everyone else shared near the fountain. He always sat on the same bench at the far edge of the park, the one beneath the large oak tree, away from everyone, away from the dogs, away from the noise. Beside him sat an old golden retriever. The dog looked ancient, gray around the muzzle, slow when walking, gentle eyes. Most mornings the dog barely moved. Walter would quietly rest a hand on the dog's back while watching the rest of the park. Not talking, just watching. For 2 years, every day. The regulars developed theories. Maybe he's angry at the world. Maybe he doesn't like people. Maybe he's just weird. Theories eventually became assumptions. Assumptions became facts, at least in their minds. One Saturday morning, a young mother named Emily arrived with her 6-year-old son, Noah. The boy immediately spotted the golden retriever. "Mom, doggy." Before Emily could stop him, Noah started running toward Walter's bench. The old man's dog lifted its head slightly. Its tail wagged once, twice. Noah smiled. But then Emily hurried after him and grabbed his shoulder. "Noah." Her voice was firm. "Leave them alone." The boy looked confused. "But I just want to pet the dog." Emily lowered her voice. "The man doesn't like people." Walter heard every word. The bench wasn't that far away, but he didn't react, didn't look up, didn't defend himself. He simply stared ahead, as if he was used to it. Noah looked disappointed as his mother led him away. The golden retriever watched them leave. Its tail stopped moving. Walter gently scratched behind the dog's ear. "Sorry, buddy." The dog leaned against his leg. That was all. Across the park, 2 women watched the exchange. He could at least smile. "I know. He always looks annoyed." One of them shrugged. "Maybe that's why nobody talks to him." Walter heard that too. He heard most things. People always assumed old men couldn't hear very well. They were usually wrong. The truth was, Walter remembered every single comment, every whispered warning, every awkward glance, every parent who pulled a child away. But after a while, it stopped hurting. Or at least that's what he told himself. The only opinion that mattered sat beside him. And that opinion belonged to a 13-year-old golden retriever named Max. At 8:12, Walter stood up, exactly as he did every morning. The dog struggled slightly getting to its feet. Walter waited patiently. No rush. Max finally stood. Walter smiled, a real smile, the kind nobody in the park ever saw, because he only gave it to the dog. Then they started walking toward the exit. As always. Same time, same path, same routine. But that morning something unexpected happened. A black SUV pulled into the parking lot. The vehicle stopped near the entrance. A woman stepped out, wearing a blue jacket with the logo of the city animal shelter. Walter froze. For the first time all morning, he looked nervous. The woman scanned the park, then spotted him and smiled. "Walter." Several people nearby looked over. Walter's expression immediately tightened. Not angry, worried, almost like he hoped nobody would recognize him. The woman started walking toward his bench, and for the first time in 2 years, every curious eye in the dog park turned toward the old man everyone avoided. Something was about to happen, and nobody there had any idea how wrong they had been about him. The woman from the animal shelter reached Walter's bench, carrying a leash and a folder. Max immediately recognized her. His tail began wagging before she even spoke. "Hey, handsome." She knelt beside the golden retriever and scratched his neck. Max closed his eyes happily. Walter looked around the park. He hated attention. Unfortunately, attention had already arrived. Several dog owners had stopped talking. Others pretended not to watch, while very obviously watching. The woman smiled. "I've been looking everywhere for you." Walter sighed. "You know where I sit." "Exactly." She laughed. "Which makes you surprisingly easy to find." Walter wasn't smiling. The woman finally noticed. Her expression softened. "Sorry." Walter glanced toward the curious crowd. "They're listening?" "Good." She said it so casually that Walter blinked. "What?" The woman stood and looked around the park. Then she noticed something too. People weren't just listening. They were staring, like they expected drama, or trouble, or confirmation that Walter was exactly the unpleasant old man they imagined. The woman shook her head. People were unbelievable. "Walter." She handed him the folder. "You got another letter." Walter's face immediately changed. Not annoyance, not embarrassment. Something much deeper. Hope. The people watching noticed it too, because it was the first real emotion they'd ever seen from him. His hands trembled slightly as he opened the envelope. Inside was a photograph. Walter stared at it silently, then looked away. His eyes suddenly wet. The woman smiled softly. "They sent that yesterday." Walter swallowed. "He's happy." The woman nodded. "Very." Across the park, Emily watched carefully. The same mother who had pulled Noah away. She glanced at another dog owner. "What was that about?" The other woman shrugged. "No idea." Back at the bench, Walter carefully slid the photograph back into the envelope, as though it might break. The shelter worker looked down at Max. "You ready, old man?" Max wagged again. Walter laughed quietly. Not at the joke, but the fact that nobody knew which old man she meant. The woman checked her watch. "I should get going." Walter nodded. "Thanks for bringing it." "Any time." She started walking back toward the parking lot, then suddenly stopped. "Oh." She turned around. "Good news." Walter looked up. The woman smiled. "Rosie got adopted yesterday." For a moment, Walter didn't respond. Then his shoulders relaxed, like he had been carrying a weight nobody else could see. "Really? Really? Permanent home?" "Permanent home." Walter closed his eyes briefly and smiled. This time everyone in the park saw it. A genuine smile. Warm, relieved, almost proud. The shelter worker pointed toward him. "You know, one of these days I'm going to convince you to volunteer inside the shelter, instead of doing everything the hard way." Walter shook his head immediately. "No." "Why not?" "You know why." The woman sighed. "People." Walter nodded. "People." She laughed. "You're impossible." Then she got into her SUV and drove away. Silence settled across the dog park again. But it felt different now, because suddenly everyone had questions. Big questions. Who was Rosie? What was in the photograph? Why did a shelter worker know him so well? And most importantly, why had the old man who supposedly hated everyone looked happier talking about dogs than most people looked talking about their own families? Walter stood up slowly. Max followed. The usual routine, the usual walk toward the exit. But halfway there, someone stepped into his path. Walter stopped. It was Noah, the 6-year-old boy. His mother froze 20 feet away. Noah. But the boy didn't move. He looked directly at Walter, then at Max, then back at Walter. "Excuse me?" Walter waited. The boy pointed at the golden retriever. "Can I tell him goodbye?" The entire dog park seemed to hold its breath. Emily looked mortified. Walter looked surprised. And Max's tail was already wagging. Slowly, hopefully. For the first time in a very long while, Walter didn't know what to say. For a few seconds, nobody moved. Not Noah, not Emily, not Walter. Not even Max. The entire dog park seemed strangely quiet. Then Walter looked down at the golden retriever. "Well," Max's tail started thumping harder against the ground. Walter sighed dramatically. "I suppose that's a yes." Noah's face lit up. He carefully approached and knelt beside the dog. Unlike most children, he didn't rush, didn't grab, didn't squeeze. He simply held out his hand. Max sniffed it, then gently rested his head against the boy's knee. Walter noticed something immediately. Max trusted the kid. That didn't happen often anymore. Old dogs became cautious, just like old men. Noah scratched behind Max's ear. The golden retriever practically melted. "Oh, wow," the boy laughed. "He likes that spot?" Walter nodded. "He always has." For the first time, Noah looked directly at Walter. "What's his name?" "Max." "How old is he?" 13. The boy's eyes widened. "That's ancient." Walter laughed. A real laugh. Unexpected even to himself. "Max would agree with you." Across the park, Emily looked stunned. She had never heard the old man laugh before. Honestly, she'd never imagined he could. Noah kept petting the dog, then asked the question that changed everything. "Is Max your best friend?" Walter's smile faded slightly. Not completely. Just enough. The boy noticed. Children always noticed things adults missed. Walter looked at Max for several seconds, then quietly answered, "No." Noah blinked. "No?" Walter shook his head. "Max isn't my dog." The words landed like a stone in still water. Emily heard them. The nearby dog owners heard them. Everyone heard them. Noah looked confused. "If he's not your dog?" He pointed at the leash. "Why are you with him?" Walter hesitated. For a moment it looked like he might simply leave, like he usually did, whenever conversations became personal. But then Max leaned against his leg, and somehow that made the decision for him. Walter slowly sat back down on the bench. The dog park had never seen him do that. Usually he left by now. Instead, he looked toward the empty baseball field beyond the fence, his eyes distant, somewhere years away. "My wife loved dogs." The park became silent. Nobody pretended not to listen anymore. Walter continued, "More than people, if we're being honest." A few people laughed softly. Even Walter smiled. "Every weekend she'd drag me to shelters." He shook his head. "I spent 20 years pretending I wasn't enjoying it." Noah listened carefully, the way only children can. Completely, undistracted. "What happened?" Walter's smile disappeared. The question was innocent, but the answer wasn't. "She got sick." The boy's expression changed immediately, because even 6-year-olds understand those words. Walter stared at the ground. "Before she died." His voice became quieter. "She made me promise something." Noah waited. So did everyone else. Walter swallowed, then said, "She told me not to let them die alone." Nobody spoke, not a single person. The wind moved through the trees. Dogs barked somewhere in the distance. But inside the circle around Walter's bench, everything felt still. Noah frowned. "Who?" Walter looked at Max, then toward the shelter across town that most people never thought about. The old dogs. His hand rested gently on Max's back. The sick ones. The ones nobody wants. A strange heaviness settled over the dog park. Walter continued quietly. People adopt puppies. Nobody disagreed. They adopt young dogs. Still true. But a 13-year-old dog with arthritis. He smiled sadly. Not many people are looking for that. Emily felt something tighten in her chest because she suddenly remembered the photograph. The letter. Rosie. The shelter worker. Everything. The pieces were starting to fit together. Walter looked at Max. Most of them only have a few months left. His voice stayed calm, but somehow that made it hurt more. So, I take them here. Noah stared. Every day. Walter nodded. Every day. The boy looked around the park, at the dogs running, the owners laughing, the sunshine beginning to break through the clouds, then back at Max. So, they can have fun. Walter smiled. For the first time that morning, his eyes looked warm. Exactly. Noah grinned. That's awesome. Walter looked genuinely surprised. The boy shrugged. If I was a dog, I'd want that. A few people laughed softly, but several others were wiping their eyes. Because suddenly, the strange old man at the edge of the park looked completely different. Not mysterious, not unfriendly, not dangerous, just loyal. Painfully loyal. And for the first time in 2 years, someone sat beside Walter on the bench without being afraid of him. It was a 6-year-old boy. And somehow that meant more to Walter than he expected. The next morning, Walter arrived at 7:03 as usual. But something was different. For the first time in 2 years, someone waved at him. It was Emily. Walter looked behind himself to make sure she wasn't waving at someone else. She laughed. I'm pretty sure it's you. Walter nodded awkwardly. People's skills had never recovered after years of living alone. Max, however, had no such problem. The old retriever immediately trotted toward Noah, who was already running across the grass. Max! His tail wagged so hard, his entire body moved with it. Walter watched them for a moment, then sat on his bench. Same bench, same tree, same routine. Yet somehow everything felt unfamiliar, because people now knew. And once people know the truth, they start seeing things they should have noticed all along. Like how Max wasn't always the same dog. A week later, a woman named Karen approached Walter. She pointed toward the leash. That's not Max. Walter looked down. The dog beside him was a black Labrador with cloudy eyes. No. What happened to Max? Walter smiled softly. He got adopted. Karen blinked. At 13? 13 and a half. She looked genuinely shocked. Walter couldn't blame her. He had been shocked too. The Labrador settled beside his feet. Karen stared at the dog. Then, who's this? Walter scratched behind the dog's ears. This is Duke. The dog immediately leaned into the touch. Karen smiled. He's sweet. He is. How old? 12. Karen hesitated, then quietly asked, Terminal? Walter nodded. The word hung heavily between them. Cancer. Karen looked away. I lost my dog last year. Walter's expression softened. I'm sorry. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Karen sat down. Not across the park. Not standing awkwardly. Directly beside him. The second person ever. Walter wasn't sure how he felt about that. But he didn't leave. Over the following weeks, things changed. Slowly, then all at once. People started greeting him. Children started greeting the dogs. Someone brought treats. Someone else donated blankets to the shelter. Another family volunteered. The dog park began learning names, not Walter's, the dogs. Rosie, Max, Duke, Charlie, Benny, Lucy. Old dogs, forgotten dogs, dogs living on borrowed time. Each had a story, and suddenly people wanted to hear them. One cold November morning, Walter arrived with an empty leash. The entire park noticed immediately. No dog, no wagging tail, no slow footsteps beside him. Just Walter, alone. Emily was the first to approach. "Where's Duke?" Walter sat down carefully. For a long moment he stared at the grass, then smiled. A sad smile, but a peaceful one. "Duke passed away Tuesday." Nobody spoke. Several people lowered their eyes. Walter nodded slowly. He wasn't alone. The sentence hit harder than anyone expected, because everybody understood what it meant. Walter had kept his promise. Again, and again, and again, for years. Emily sat beside him quietly. A few minutes later, Karen joined them. Then Noah. Then two other dog owners. Then another. And another. Without planning it, Walter's bench slowly filled. The very bench nobody had sat near for 2 years. Walter looked around, confused, almost embarrassed. "What are all of you doing?" Noah answered first. "We're keeping you company." The old man laughed softly, then looked away quickly, because his eyes suddenly weren't dry anymore. And for the first time since his wife had died, Walter realized something. Maybe he wasn't the only one keeping lonely souls from being alone anymore. Maybe the promise had spread. Winter arrived early that year. The grass in the dog park turned pale. The mornings became quieter, and Walter kept coming. Every day, 7:03, just like always. But now he was never alone. Some mornings there would be 3 people waiting for him. Sometimes 5, sometimes more. The man everyone used to avoid had somehow become part of everyone's routine. Walter still didn't talk much. That part never changed. But the park changed around him. People brought old towels for the shelter. Children collected dog toys. Several families started volunteering on weekends. And something incredible began happening. Older dogs started getting adopted. Not all of them, not even most of them, but enough. Enough to matter. One morning, the shelter worker from the blue SUV returned. This time, she wasn't carrying a folder. She was carrying a leash. At the other end of it walked a thin brown mutt with white paws and nervous eyes. The dog looked terrified. Walter immediately knelt down. "Hey there." The dog's tail tucked tighter. The woman sighed. "His name is Rusty." Walter nodded. "How old?" 14. A few people nearby winced. 14. For most shelter dogs, that number might as well have been invisible ink. Nobody wanted to adopt a dog that old. The shelter worker lowered her voice. "We almost lost him last week." Walter looked at Rusty, then at the woman, then back at Rusty. The dog avoided eye contact completely. Walter understood that look. Some creatures stopped expecting kindness after enough disappointment. People did too. The woman handed over the leash. Walter smiled softly. "Come on, partner." Rusty didn't move. Walter stood patiently. No pulling, no forcing. Just waiting. Eventually the dog took one step, then another, then another. As Walter led him toward the familiar bench, from across the park, Noah spotted them first. "New dog." The boy sprinted across the grass. Emily shouted after him. "No running." Too late. Walter laughed. Rusty nearly jumped out of his skin. But Noah stopped several feet away. He had learned. The park had learned. Old dogs needed patience. The boy crouched down. "Hi, Rusty." The dog didn't approach, but he didn't retreat either. "Progress." Walter smiled. That's how it starts. Months ago, nobody would have noticed a frightened old dog. Now half the park was cheering for him. Walter looked around quietly, at the families, the children, the dogs, the people sitting together, and for a moment, he imagined his wife standing there, watching, smiling, proud. The thought hit him harder than expected, because for years he had carried the promise alone, and now he wasn't carrying it alone anymore. The shelter worker sat beside him. "You know something?" Walter looked over. She nodded toward the crowd. "You changed this place." Walter shook his head immediately. "No." "You did." "No." He pointed toward the people. "They changed." The woman smiled. "Maybe." Then she glanced toward Rusty. The old dog had finally allowed Noah to pet him. His tail moved once, twice, slowly, cautiously, but it moved. The woman laughed. "Looks like he likes the kid." Everyone likes the kid. That was true. The morning passed peacefully. Dogs ran. People talked. Coffee cups emptied. Sunlight climbed higher. Eventually, the shelter worker stood to leave. Before getting into her SUV, she handed Walter one final envelope. Walter frowned. "What's this?" She smiled. "Open it." Inside was a photograph. A large group photo. The entire dog park. Dozens of people. Dozens of dogs, children, families, volunteers, and right in the center, Walter, looking surprised because he clearly hadn't known the picture was being taken. Attached to the photograph was a handwritten note. Walter unfolded it slowly, then read it. Once, twice, a third time. His eyes filled immediately. The note said, "Because of you, they weren't alone. And neither were we." Walter lowered the paper. For several seconds he couldn't speak. The park blurred behind tears. The shelter worker quietly drove away. Nobody disturbed him. Nobody rushed him. They simply waited. The way he had waited for so many frightened old dogs. Finally, Walter folded the note carefully and slipped it into his jacket pocket, right over his heart. Then he looked up, at the people around him, at Rusty, at Noah, at the bench that had once been empty. And for the first time in many years, the promise no longer felt like a burden. It felt like a legacy, a promise that would continue long after he was gone. Walter smiled, a real smile, the kind that reached his eyes. And this time, the entire dog park smiled back.